To introduce ourselves, I'm Sagar Kancharla. I lead the Energy Transition Advisory Services at WSP Canada, based out of Toronto.
And my name is Klaus van Buren, and I work from WSP in Sweden. And together with Sagar, I've been part of some of the over 200 hydrogen projects that WSP is currently doing around the world.
In terms of the presentation today, I think it's pretty straightforward. We'll provide you some context to developing a comprehensive business case for hydrogen investments. We'll provide some frameworks and go through some case studies and be open for question and answer. When you look at the 2020s were supposed to be the decade of definite decarbonization. But it hasn't been that way for the first 3 years. We had some significant headwinds. The supply chain disruption that started with the pandemic hasn't fully recovered. And the war in Europe brought to the fore the importance of energy security. The high energy prices that have resulted have contributed to the high inflation and high interest rate environment that we are currently in. It is to be recognized, though, that how necessity forces us to adapt. Europe has been looking for alternate sources of supply for natural gas for decades. But the war has led to finding the alternate sources in a very short period of time. There have been some good tailwinds too. COP27 and COP15 have reinforced the need to build a green infrastructure. And governments recognizing the technological developments have established some very enabling policies. So much so that the Inflation Reduction Act of US has set out a global chain reaction with governments globally following up with their own enabling policies. In India, in the last in Canada, in the last fall economic statement, we have the income tax credits and various funding programs. Claes, how is it in the European Union?
Yes, in European Union, we have also been following the bills and the strategy and policies in the United States. And what we can see is that a huge influx of new policies, new strategies, both on a European Union level, but also national levels, where we have a lot of incentives coming into force, both during this year and the coming years, that will further strengthen the hydrogen market, both on a European level, but also on a national level. So there's a total other ballgame these years when we, unlike the previous years, what we have seen on the European market.
And all this, thanks, Claes, and all these policies, the headwinds and the tailwinds are having a significant impact on the energy security, on the emissions policies, and in fact impacting the hydrogen projects development as well. And let's try to understand what the progress has been. So when you look at the hydrogen developments here, there's lots of buzz globally in terms of hydrogen project developments. From what we saw in 2020, a production of 80 megatons, the world is expecting about 660 megatons by 2050. That's a significant increase. And if we were to realize those amounts of 660 megatons, that translates to 80 gigatons of cumulative CO2 abatement by 2050. That is pretty significant achievement if we can pursue that. But when you really look at the progress that has been made, and you realize that the good progress is not good enough. We have a large number of proposals, but there's very few are at the final investment stage. There's been technological progressions, but the competition is still not there to compete with other alternate solutions. Financial institutions are sitting with a significant dry powder, but very little flowing to project finance the hydrogen investments. Safety concerns exist, but we haven't reached a consensus on global standards. Public awareness is increasing, but affordability seems to be still a major issue here. When you look at all these stakeholders and wanting to move the hydrogen economy forward, we're still counting on very traditional appraisal techniques, and we think those are inadequate. We have this typical project finance evaluations following the discounted cash flow and assuming the investment decisions will be made. I think we need to look at more comprehensive approach to developing the business cases. And this is where we're looking at the need for hydrogen investments. We looked at the diverse motivations and objectives of the various stakeholders, and we realized that the business case needs to address the various questions. There is the expectations of reducing emissions, definitely. And when you're looking at clean energy investments, we need lots of technical inputs and viability of all the technologies here. So we developed this framework, what we call it as INSPIRE. This framework considers the technical, the financial, economic, and sustainability factors for all the investment decisions. And by reviewing the opportunities and risks through these several components, the project's performance can be evaluated using a multi-criteria decision analytics. We'll get into each of this component, but let's pick on the first one, the strategic rationale. We won't dwell significantly, but it is very significant. As I've said, there's lots of interest in hydrogen investments, but the project proponents and developers need to understand where do they want to participate in the hydrogen value chain. Hydrogen is a versatile product, and you could participate in upstream all the way to downstream to exports by converting hydrogen into a derivative such as ammonia. So it's really important where you want to participate in the whole value chain. And the process, once we have this framework established, the process of utilizing the INSPIRE framework is very straightforward. It follows a flexible approach. The first step involves understanding your project. This could be, are you comparing different hydrogen projects? Are you looking at hydrogen with other clean energy projects? Based on the objectives, the framework can be calibrated. One could have different weights for different components. And in the analysis stage, this is where individual component tools and processes are utilized for reviewing these projects, and further a multi-criteria decision analytics computational framework is applied so as to arrive at the rank of each project. Eventually, the MCDA results are reviewed and recommendations provided for investment decisions. These kind of frameworks are getting more and more prevalent. It's not this is the only framework. If somebody is following on the financial sustainable finance side, accountability for finance is one of the frameworks that is also being advocated here. Let's get into some of the components of this framework. The first important one is the technical component. When you're considering decarbonization, you're counting on some of these current and emerging technologies, including hydrogen. The technical assessment plays a critical role in investment decisions. And some of the sub-criteria in the technical component includes maturity of the technologies. You could use some of the scales like the TRLs that are lots of agencies provide, which are globally adopted. You need to look at the energy output of the technology and so on. The energy output can be enhanced depending on the technology through optimization process. Let me expand on that. For example, if you're looking at green hydrogen that is produced with clean power as the feedstock, the clean power could be wind or solar. It is very intermittent in nature. The various components across the, say, the green ammonia production could include intermittent power generation. It would involve some power storage, electrolysis, hydrogen storage, and probably a conversion to ammonia using ammonia synthesis and storage before it is exported. There could be any combination of constraints across this chain that could result in very suboptimal outputs. Hence, statistical modeling is very important to optimize the energy output across the value chain and becomes much more significant. And by carefully designing the optimization variables, as this graphic shows in terms of grid connection or the strike price or some of the REX constraints, electrolyzer size, one could really optimize the outputs. And these outputs include the hydrogen production, the energy consumed, and including looking at some of the financial measures like the levelized cost before you get into more detailed analysis here. So it shows the importance of the technical assessment. And when you look at the financial and economic components next, the financial component is very similar to all of us. We've been looking at infrastructure developments for a long while through discounted cash flow analysis. But I would like to highlight a few considerations that while trying to provide financial measures such as levelized cost or investment metrics and credit metrics, we try to quantify and monetize elements that definitely add value. Let's not ignore some, and these could include carbon credits. And let's also appreciate that at the early stage, there is significant uncertainty. So instead of focusing on point estimates, let's become comfortable with more expected range of estimates. Let's be realistic on the technology learning curves. There is an expectations that the electrolyzer cost would decline following the previous renewable technologies like wind and solar. But let's appreciate that the electrolyzer cost contribution to the levelized cost of hydrogen is only around 30%, and 60 to 65% could be the power cost. So the power cost decline is still further important. And how much further can the power cost decline? And this is where the optimization process, as well as integrating renewable power with the storage, becomes more important here when you're looking at the financial evaluation of projects. On the economic side, governments are very interested in creating economic development in the regions of hydrogen project development. Any funding application should look at the economic impacts. And that's why GDP and tax revenues and labor become that's so much more important in your business case. Let's move on to the sustainability factors, and I'll turn it over to Klaus.
Thank you very much. And important sustainability factors, of course, are the environment, like the ecosystem impact, human impact, and resource depletion. But also governance, of course, diversity and inclusion, equity participation, etc. But I want to focus a little bit on the social values here, because as Sagar mentioned, there have been, of course, the tax revenues that it could provide for the local communities, for the state, etc. But it can also generate so much more than the actual profits. We see that more and more communities and more projects are brought forward and also are asked to do more than just the tax revenues. When it comes to social values, it could be created over the entire life of a project as a result of the company's activities. It could be part of the core business operation. And these are factors that could be included in this INSPIRE model. Of course, it could be training, employment, or product and process innovation, but also it could be include sponsorship or social services, providing the built community infrastructure with schools, libraries, playgrounds, etc. And when I started with these projects, and I think also for Sagar, I thought that these social factors would not be that important, but they have been extremely important. And we're really happy to see that, because truly impactful social performance involves more than just simply managing a company's potential negative social impacts, but also communicating and including the local communities in these social investments. So a lot is about acceptance and active participation, but also in including in with the social values that these projects can provide. So these are some of the sustainability factors that we look at when we are using the Inspire model. But back to you, Sagar, for the next part here.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Having evaluated the projects under each component, and again, with the availability of time, we provide an overview. The next step in the process is to bring together all these individual evaluations. For this, the multi-criteria data analytics approach is followed. The process really involves developing a computational framework where we first determine the various scoring scales and weights, and then scoring the various project options against the established criteria. For scoring these options, the approach is very flexible. We try to look at quantitative, and if it's qualitative, let's develop a scale, and so that we can rank individual components. We try to monetize the benefits, and we have some perception surveys as well. The results are tested for reasonableness, so that the calibration of the computational framework is well done. For modeling of MCDA, various techniques are available. For example, the most common one used is the analytic hierarchy process that considers criteria weighting by eliciting these values from the decision maker through a series of pairwise comparisons, as opposed to seeking some very numerical values directly. The process results in ranked project options. This process could be iterative with more granular information and fewer options as we move from screening a large number of projects to selecting one project to even optimizing the selected project as well. So having introduced the framework, let's take a couple of case studies now. So in this case study, the client is a crown corporation in Canada, and there was a directive from the ministry to develop hydropower for the oncoming power demand that is expected in the middle to medium to long term. And it was required to evaluate the hydropower with other power generation technologies. With the objectives known, we identified first the various power generation technologies that could meet the demand. We normalized the annual energy output for these generation technologies so that it allows for comparisons across technologies. Then we established the various criteria and sub-criteria components. These include technical, financial, social, and environment. But we went to the sub-criteria. For example, in the technical side, it wasn't just looking at the maturity of the technology or the resource assessment, but we looked at reliability of each of these technologies over a long period of time. We evaluated all these technologies against each of these components, including the sub-criteria. That itself was providing valuable information like the levelized cost, what is the reliability, what is the environmental impact, and so on. But then we developed a computational framework of a multi-criteria data analytics framework, where we developed the weights and the scoring scale using the AHP process along with our client. The power technologies were then scored to arrive at a ranked list of technologies, and we did some stress testing to understand the reasonableness of these technologies. The key observations from this process and project were, it became easy to compare the technologies. All these technologies have their benefits and disadvantages. While renewable power like solar and wind are economical, the reliability factors of hydropower became much better. And similarly, when we look at the other technology like the small modular reactors, it scored well on emissions sub-criteria because of this clean energy properties. But the framework allowed for a comparison of all these discrete technologies. And the framework also allows for a pass-through kind of components. So for examples, we mentioned here on the indigenous communities implications. We did not want to trade off any of the benefits that could accrue to the indigenous communities. We wanted to maximize the benefits to these communities. Overall, it became a very defendable process by following a very structured and drawing to a ranked list of options. And it's very defensible that the client was able to present to the ministries. Claes, do you want to go through another case study?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So, Sagar and I, what we have seen in the last couple of years is that more and more industrial players, investors, have taken an interest in the hydrogen field, but also the energy field as a whole. And examples that we see is that a lot of these companies want to create a new business unit or a new company or a joint venture, etc. And one of these examples is the case study number 2 here, where WSP went in as a strategic partner and also performed everything from in-depth market analysis to business models and current and project future market analysis. So this is an energy company in Europe that wanted to create a new business unit focused on hydrogen. First of all, of course, using the Inspire model, we see that what is the strategic fit for this part in the larger business? How could they help each other? What are the risks? What are the opportunities with this? Of course, the next part of this is to do a technical due diligence of a sort, but also go through basically what Sagar mentioned on the case study number 1, the different productions technologies, what is suitable to create hydrogen, in what markets, and how could they fit into the current business model and vision of this company. And of course, what is extremely important to realize here is that in addition to the technical sides, we always have the financial and economical. And those can differ a lot between different projects, different regions, and of course, regions inside a country. That's something we see in the Nordics, and I know that for a fact that we also see it in Canada and the rest of the world, where perfectly well financially and economically suitable business model and using some sort of technology for hydrogen is suitable in one area, but not suitable at all in other areas. So using both the strategic rationale, the technical, the financial and economic parts of the Inspire model, we develop both, for example, the market study, but also a lot of strategies and also prepared materials for their business models, but also the decisions, how they should go into the market and not go into other parts of the market. And of course, environmental factors are extremely important. They are bound the ESG goals, but also they wanted to see how and if they can go into further in other parts of the value chain, and of course make sure that the whole value chain for them is green, is renewable, and both to satisfy the customers but also their owners. And last but not least, the social governance. As we mentioned before, this is an extremely important factor for this company because they had some current assets in the Nordics where they wanted to see what is the next step for these assets. Could they, with hydrogen, mean something new, mean something for the local communities and also to improve their social values for these communities? So these are some of the factors that Sagar and I looked together with our colleagues around the globe when we helped this client. And after that client, we have had several more that wanted to take a look at the Inspire model and especially to see what kind of hydrogen business is a good fit for my business. And that was a few words on this case study too. And I think we have a couple of more case studies on the next slide, Sagar.
Yeah, thanks, Klaus. I'll go through them as well. One of the things that we want to mention is that when you're looking at any of these case studies and using some form of a framework, it is to be known that you need to customize the hydrogen business case to the specific project. So here are three other examples of hydrogen projects that where we help the clients with the business case development. The first project, this is a large hydrogen project that involved investing across the value chain in Canada, from wind to electrolysis to ammonia synthesis. And some power was needed from the grid because some of the processes, and probably all of you could be familiar, requires 24/7 power supply. And and the rest of the power was from behind the meter. So the technical optimization of the value chain became very important. In addition to the importance of the technical, the client was interested in applying for some of the funding applications from the government of Canada. And as we mentioned earlier, governments are very interested in the benefits that the projects bring to the economic development of the region, and also how this project is contributing to the government's emissions reductions goals. So the framework considered all these factors that we discussed today. And the government has provided some of the tools that we were supposed to use for the funding applications. And these are very similar tools that many of you could be using for emission calculations that are available and developed by the government agencies. We were able to put forward a very successful funding application by following a very structured approach to evaluating project on multiple criteria. And that was the first project that I show here. And the second one is difference. This is the client has very good valuable salt cavern storage assets, and instead of just looking at developing the salt cavern storage for hydrogen storage and asking us to calculate what is the levelized cost of storage and how can I start developing storage, he was really interested to understand what is the potential development for a hydrogen hub leveraging these valuable salt cavern storage assets. And so our efforts were significantly uh, directed towards understanding the market opportunity and what are the enabling infrastructure in that region that is required and differentiating from other regions that are competing for hydrogen hubs in the US. So this again became a very focused market study looking at significant number of off-takers, competitor supply solutions, and enabling infrastructure that could create a hydrogen hub leveraging the storage assets in the region. So just from these two, you can see it's very different approach and customizing the business cases. Claes, do you want to pick up the third one?
Yes, thank you so much. Last not least, of course, we have the opportunities to establish a chain of hydrogen refueling stations in Sweden, and where we perform market research, business case modeling, and successful funding applications. But something I want to mention here is that in addition to the things that we performed in the other projects here on this slide, is that this and a lot of the other projects now we see are going beyond PowerPoint. So the Inspire model uses at the beginning as a business case modeling, but what we see now is that WSP and its resources around the world are doing a lot more of engineering. They do a risk analysis, etc. So one other thing that we learn from these projects is that it's a good beginning of a successful partnership and also partnering with our clients, where we help them both with the market research, business modeling, using the Inspire modeling, and then later beyond PowerPoint, the process engineering. And I think from my side, that's what I wanted to mention on this slide. And I know that Sagar wants to just finish up with some few last words.
Hey, thanks, Klaus. Thank you, and hopefully with the time available, we were able to demonstrate the value of pursuing these investment decisions in technologies such as hydrogen that do not have significant history. I think that's why we suggest a multi-criteria framework for developing your business cases. And as you look around, the governments are implementing enabling policies and programs, including funding of various hydrogen projects. We think it is time for the industry and all of us who are as stakeholders involved in accelerating the hydrogen economy to really step up and put forward strong business cases. I think one should recognize that not having a comprehensive approach to developing your hydrogen business cases could really result in risk of a lost opportunity, or in some cases, if it is hurriedly done, a risk of a stranded asset. And thus, a framework such as the Inspire could support in these type of investment decisions. Thank you. We will look at responding some of the questions now that you have sent us prior, as well as some of the questions that have come up now.
Yes, thank you, Sagar and Klaus, for a fantastic presentation. Just a reminder of the housekeeping items again. Please continue to log your questions in the question box in the control panel. And also the presentation slides are available to download in the handout box. This presentation is being recorded, and you would also receive the recording afterwards. I will start with the first question. On-site and on-demand generation of hydrogen dramatically reduce plant safety risks. Would this improve the business case?
Because I can take that question. I think the question is referring to having production close to where the demand for hydrogen and whether it de-risks the business case. Absolutely. I think if you look at the whole hydrogen value chain currently, and where the developments have taken place from a technology perspective, significant developments on the production side. But where developments are lagging is really on the delivery of hydrogen. How do we safely transport and store hydrogen? This is when we're talking about derivatives, conversions, which could be more safely transported. But right now, the volumes of hydrogen that can be transported safely are usually like volumes are small, and you're talking about trailers. But the rail and pipelines are still being capitalized. For some, that from that perspective, having the demand closer to where the production is makes sense. And this is where, going back to one of the case studies that we were alluding to of developing a hydrogen hub, one of the main incentives that there's significant conversations around hydrogen hub, it is to have the feedstock upstream, whether it is natural gas for blue hydrogen or whether it's renewable power, having the electrolysis and having the off-takers in an industrial cluster are becoming more and more popular. Thanks, Sharon. The next.
Thank you. The next question is, what is the most interesting characteristics of hydrogen as a fuel source in your opinion?
I can take that. For me, I think the flexibility with hydrogen, both to be used as in industrial applications. You can use it, of course, in fuel cells, etc. But what we have seen, for example, in Nordics, and I think we also have seen it in Canada, is to use as a feedstock industrial applications with derivatives like ammonia, methanol. You use it in green steel, of course. In Sweden, we have, of course, a hybrid H2 green steel, and I know that in Canada you have similar projects. So I will say that it solves some of the questions, not all of the green transition questions that we have. But for me, it's the flexibility, etc. And will it change everything? Will it compete with everything? Of course not. They have some parts and some roles to play. Not everything, but some. So I hope that was from my side.
Thank you. The next question is, given the low BTU value of hydrogen, conversion will require a massive economic changeover, including significant impacts. Are clients considering the total impacts of conversion project or just the positive of hydrogen economy?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Klaus, I'll take this, and if you want to add, please go ahead. How I interpret this is it's kind of like a retrofit. Like I don't agree with this. Like let's not just look at building all new infrastructure for hydrogen. We need to look at how we can leverage the existing infrastructure. And that's what we look at. And think about it. We have just under our feet thousands of miles of natural gas infrastructure that can be leveraged by blending natural gas and hydrogen, not just for reducing the emissions of natural gas for heating purposes, but also for transporting hydrogen from point A to point B. And similarly, the gas turbines that run on natural gas need to be looked at for using hydrogen as the feedstock for the turbines. Similarly, in the transportation sector as well, so it's just not using fuel cells for transportation of trucks, but how can we leverage the ICEs, the internal combustion engines as well, that can use hydrogen as a fuel. So definitely we should look at the whole spectrum as how can we leverage the existing infrastructure and proven technologies with hydrogen as a feedstock or a fuel.
Thank you. There's a question here about Sweden, in particular with respect to the HRS project in Sweden. Are you able to comment on the challenge of transporting large volume of hydrogen, and what are some foreseen solutions to these challenges?
I can take that one. I can guess it's a Swedish question. Absolutely, there are some major challenges when it comes to transportation. For those that don't know, the Swedish context when it comes to this is that we lack a lot of gas infrastructure. We are not used to using massive amounts of natural gas or biomethanol, etc., etc. So for Sweden, it's a major shift going from a more or less electrified system to a gas system in some parts. And what we see in a lot of the projects that we are involved in, of course, we are looking at pipelines in certain areas and certain projects. We're also looking at the major challenge actually to buffer basically the variable wind power and make it usable for basically an even load when it comes to industrial applications. And I think the jury is still out there, and we see that we are not that lucky as Canada when it comes to salt caverns, etc. So we are struggling to find our solutions here in Sweden. But I think we will see a lot more derivatives coming out, like ammonia, methanol, etc., for storage. I think we will see some pipelines in certain areas, but not in all areas. So I think there are some projects that are a bit over-optimistic. When it comes to refueling stations, there'll be more trucks. There'll be, of course, technological developments to make it easier accessible when it comes to restocking the fuel in these stations. So we can see that for different applications, different methods will be used. I hope that was an answer on that question as well.
Perfect, thank you. The next question, do you see collaborative contracting project delivery models like progressive DB and IPD being used in the hydrogen markets you are connected to?
Let me take this question combining just from an EPC perspective and project finance and not specifically a specific delivery model. And we can get into the details as well. One of the things when you look at any project finance side is the three important risks. Again, I don't want to generalize. It really varies from project to project. But the project finance really is interested in whether technology can deliver, right? And then it looks at the EPC risk, and then it looks at the offtake risk. So when it comes to the to the mitigating the EPC risk and whichever model you're looking at, there is an opportunity to develop collaborative contracting projects. I think that's the question that they're asking. What needs to be understood is that it is easy for the developer looking for a fully wrapped EPC contract. It's great that I have one contractor, I can transfer the risk, and then the project gets developed for hydrogen. But let's appreciate that hydrogen is relatively new in terms of project development. It's very difficult and unrealistic to expect a fully wrapped with one contractor, right? And even if the developer was able to find a fully wrapped EPC contract, the premiums will be very high that could impact your viability of the project in the first place. So when you're looking at any of these EPC partnerships, it is fair to expect that it'll be more than a wraps, it'll be a limited number of contracts where the principal contractor would look at ways to pass on the risk, or whoever is best positioned to mitigate the risk. So it's eventually a model would evolve. There would be partnerships that is more viable than a fully wrapped EPC contract, and that's where we see an EPC management type of models becoming more prevalent in terms of project delivery models.
Thank you. Next question is, I was wondering if we can make a business case where solar PV direct current can be directly supplied to electrolyzer to produce green hydrogen.
I can take that one, sorry. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually really glad that we have colleagues around the world working a lot with solar PV and hydrogen. I know that we have colleagues working in South America, Middle East, Australia, Africa, also Europe, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, also in Canada and the Nordics. We have examples from full large-scale projects where they absolutely take a look at this because it will deliver a very low leveraged cost of hydrogen, but also it could be for uninterrupted power supplies for hospitals, etc. That's something we actually have seen even in Sweden, which is not well known for its solar capacity, but we have seen it that they use solar here to create hydrogen to be stored and used later for hospitals, schools, etc. So the short answer, yes, absolutely. And I'm actually really thrilled that we are part of some of those projects.
Thank you. I will take the last question. This is I think for you, Sagar, for in Canada. Do you see impacts on hydrogen project development in Canada due to rising interest rates and US Inflation Reduction Act?
Yeah, one should expect that the current high interest rate environment will have some implications on project developments, any infrastructure developments. I think all of us benefited when the previous renewable technologies like solar and wind did not see a high interest rate environment, and we were able to progress in those project developments in a very low interest rate environments. But in the present case for hydrogen, unfortunately, we don't have such luck. But at the same time, and I think the government globally are doing the needful through the funding programs. Yes, it is at a high inflation, high interest rate environment, but let's look at the various incentives being offered. In Canada, for example, we have the ITCs, we have the various funding programs, and the progress is being made not just on hydrogen, whether it's on the CCS side or on the wind side, there are lots of incentive programs being provided. So from that perspective, and I think there is a first mover advantage even in an established leadership, even in this high interest rate, high inflation environment.
Thank you so much. We are at the end of the presentation. Sagar, would you like to mention the upcoming convention in Canada?
Yeah, sure. Again, thanks all for participating in this webinar. And I know some of you are awake at odd hours in different parts of the world, and we really appreciate your participation. Uh, WSP is one of the sponsors at the upcoming Hydrogen Convention in April, and I will be there along with my colleagues from WSP. So if anybody is in Edmonton for the convention, we have a booth there. Please come and meet us, and look forward for continuing with this conversation. And also watch the space that we have on a more series of webinars related to hydrogen and other topics. Thank you.
Indeed.
Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Sagar and Klaus, for a fantastic presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Please feel free to follow up with the presenters via the contact details shown on the screen. And have a wonderful day, everyone. I will wrap up the session now. Thank you.
Thank you.